Okay, everyone. So as it is time, now I will give the floor to Gabriela for this webinar. Please welcome Gabriela.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to all the participants and the panelists. I'm head of program on child protection in travel and tourism at ECPAT International, and I have a pleasure to moderate this session today. And I'm very happy to introduce our excellent panelists. So let me start first with Lucia Soletti. We will hear from you first. Lucia is Chief on Child Protection at UNICEF Cambodia and brings over 12 years of working experience, including prevention of orphanage tourism. Secondly, we will hear from Marie-Laure Laminaire, who is Deputy Executive Director for Programs at ECPAT International. That is a global network of civil society organizations focused on ending all forms of sexual exploitation of children. And Marie has a professional background in internet governance and child online safety. Thirdly, we will have the opportunity to hear from Roy Ariel. He's General Manager at Global Sustainable Tourism Council, that is the leading authority in setting and managing standards for sustainable travel and tourism. And I'm very pleased that we are joined today also by Bertie Lawson, who is CEO of Sampan Travel. It's a tour operator organizing tailor-made journeys through Myanmar. And it's also a company that is member of the Code of Conduct for the Protection of Children from Sexual Exploitation in Travel and Tourism. Last but not least, we are really honored to be joined today by Dr. Rinchen Chopel, Director General of South Asia Initiative to End Violence Against Children, that is driving this agenda in 8 countries of the region. And I would also like to thank Damien Brosnan, the manager of the code, who is here with us and who will help to filter questions from the participants during the Q&A session that will be at the end. And I encourage everybody to ask and write your questions in the Q&A box during all the presentations. Damien will be filtering these questions and we will try to address as many as possible of them at the end. So thank you once again for joining us and joining this session. And just quickly before I turn to panelists, I would like to give a brief background to our discussion. We all know that unprecedented challenges have been posed to all children's rights by COVID pandemic, and we are feeling these consequences all over the world. And this crisis has been affecting economies and disrupting businesses, which in consequences, of course, makes families and children more vulnerable than ever. And in all this situation, the travel and tourism sector has been the hardest hit itself, including a wide range of companies. And we also have to remember here informal small business street vendors. And this is particularly devastating for this region, where countries are strongly dependent on travel industry. And we're going to talk about the problem of sexual exploitation in this context, which is a persisting problem. Of course, it's not a new one, but as the world responds to the pandemic, push factors and root causes that facilitate or lead to all forms of violence against children, both online and offline, they are really intensifying now. So before the pandemic, we had this extraordinary growth of the travel and tourism sector in the last decades, and it's been bringing along a number of challenges to child protection, with offenders misusing travel and tourism infrastructure and ICT infrastructure as well. However, the problem of sexual exploitation of children in this context, it has not stopped with the closure of borders, because offenders just keep adjusting their modus operandi. And it's also well documented that traveling sex offenders are not only foreigners, they're also domestic, including long-term residents, or they come from the same region or country of a victim. So view that the risk of violence to children have been aggravated by the pandemic. Now, as the countries are still under partial lockdowns and the domestic and interregional tourism is slowly reopening, before the international tourism will start, with this meeting today, what we wanted to do is to encourage a wide discussion about the recovery phase for travel and tourism sector. So it's done with child rights in focus. So having said that, with this brief introduction, I would like to turn to our first panelist, Lucia from UNICEF Cambodia. And I would like to ask you, view this economic crisis and increased vulnerabilities of families and children. As the result, what do you see as the most critical challenge and key risk to child protection in this region, and specifically in Cambodia, where you work? Both now and also in this view of the anticipated recovery of the travel and tourism sector. Over to you, Lucia.
Thank you, Gabriela. COVID-19, together with its related containment measures and most of all, its socioeconomic impacts, is having and will continue to bring key risks to children's rights. Children are clearly more at risk of violence and threats to their safety. Existing vulnerabilities are exacerbated and new ones are emerging. And with the closure of schools and disruption of a number of services and children under confinement, children spend clearly more time online and often without supervision or access to protective services, which increases their exposure to inappropriate content, online bullying, and abuse and sexual exploitation through online predators. The economic impact is also pushing vulnerable low-income families farther into poverty and forcing parents and caregivers to resort to supplementing family income, such as forcing children into child labor or sexual exploitation. In this context, and considering the anticipated recovery of the travel and tourism industry, there are a number of important aspects to consider to ensure the well-being and safety of children. When we think about the time before COVID-19, we know that the tourism and travel industry has been very important in this region and has certainly contributed to its economic growth. But we also know that it has posed some risks to children's rights and their protection. If I take the example of Cambodia, one of the top tourist destinations in this region, with the growth of tourism, there has been also an increase in the sex industry, and the country has become a destination also for sexual predators. And with the increase of tourism, orphanage tourism and voluntourism have also increased in Cambodia, contributing together with other factors to the unnecessary institutionalization of children. Last November, the UN General Assembly adopted a new resolution on the promotion and protection of the rights of children and recognized the harm institutions cause to children and called for institutions to be progressively eliminated. It also recognized for the first time that volunteering in orphanages as well as orphanage tourism can lead to trafficking and exploitation of children. With the COVID-19 and the travel restrictions, tourism has completely dropped, leaving globally millions of families without an income. In Cambodia, many orphanages started claiming that they were struggling to operate because of lack of donations provided by tourists, highlighting once again how tourism is also a driver of child institutionalization in some ways. In addition, there is a growing concern that many children may be abandoned or separated from their families as a result of COVID-19. And there may be increased poverty, poor health, family stress, and domestic violence affecting them as well. And in this context, particular attention should be paid to prevent unnecessary recourse to residential care in response to COVID-19, including for children with disabilities and other children in particular difficult circumstances. As it happened in many previous emergencies, the orphan and the orphanage narrative was used to mobilize the support for institutionalization of children as the best and only possible solution. However, we know that the reality is exactly the opposite, and that the best way to support children is to support their families and communities, to be able to care for them. Children can be best served through family reintegration, through kinship care, foster care, and other family-based care models. And support should be offered to those who are already offering family-based care to prevent increase in the numbers of children who are institutionalized during and after the pandemic. In this situation, it will be really important to further promote and support the reintegration of children back to their families and communities and move forward the care reform process with a progressive closure or transition of institutions to community-based services. As we move forward in the recovery phase of COVID-19, there are windows of opportunities for reforms and innovation, and including for the travel and tourism sector. As we speak of a new format, I think we should also speak of a new form of travel and tourism that will have an even more central attention to the protection of children, preventing any harm towards children, and on the contrary, contributing in a positive way to the socio-economic recovery of people affected by COVID-19. I am very convinced that the tourism and travel sector can play a very important role in reinforcing the safeguarding measures to better protect children by taking a clear stand, for example, against orphanage tourism. And business can really drive the change for children and young people. And there are a number of resources that can really guide the businesses in the travel and tourism sector in this path. For example, last February, Friends International, together with the G Adventures and the Planetera Foundation, have launched the Child Welfare and Travel Industry Global Good Practices Guidelines, which represent a step forward towards ensuring the protection and safety of children in all businesses. These guidelines represent a very practical thought leadership resource for the travel and tourism industry and capture a holistic perspective of child protection concerns, which will facilitate efforts by all businesses, large and small, in the tourist sector to ensure that they are doing the right things to protect children. So I would really just, take and think about the fact that this is really actually a great opportunity to also reimagine tourism and restart tourism in even a more sustainable way, with the child rights and child protection really at the center.
Thank you very much, Lucia. That's exactly what we are calling for, and hope all together we have a stronger voice to push for that. And thank you for sharing these examples, because what is happening in Cambodia, it's also relevant for other countries in this region. And also a very valid point about the risk of orphanage tourism, especially that countries in this region do not regulate international volunteerism in children care centers, nor in activities with direct contact with children. So that's something that is a call for governments to introduce and introduce these measures and improve national legal frameworks to harmonize law in the region and ensure that this protection for children is increased. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing these examples. And I think you also mentioned about online risks, and that's why here with us is Marie Law, who can talk more about this topic, because now during the pandemic, NGOs and law enforcement are indicating a big increase in sexual crimes against children online, with sexual offenders being more active, exchanging tips and seeking to groom children. So Marie, I would like to turn to you now with the question. So there are very close interlinkages between sexual exploitation of children online and offline. So could you draw a little bit closer picture about the current situation in this respect now, and share it with us what challenges does it pose to the travel and tourism industry, and also the ICT industry, to meet their obligation to respect children's rights. Marie, over to you. You need to unmute yourself. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was saying thank you, Gabriela. It was a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'd like to start by saying that from a child protection perspective, this COVID-19 crisis is unfortunately yet another crisis. There are wars that have been going on for years in some regions of the world, natural disasters affecting children, migration crises, and they all continue to heavily impact children. The point I'm making here really is that from a child protection and child rights perspective, all of these crises are equally important and they continue to happen. We must not forget this. Having said that, we also have to acknowledge that each crisis might be different in scale and scope. So really, what is it about the COVID-19 crisis that is so alarming? Well, first of all, I'll say that never before in human history have we ever had so many adults and children locked down across sub-regions and regions. And also never in the internet history have we ever had so many adults and children living in very special circumstances away from their normal routine, with the opportunity to spend so much time connected to the internet. So which are the implications for children, specifically looking at online and offline dynamics and offending patterns? I'd like to first take a brief look at the type of evidence available and what it says so far. When, as a community, we discuss how COVID-19 has and is still affecting children and its online experiences, so far what we've heard from different sources is that there is a lot of new self-produced sexualized materials. There are also reports in some countries that there have been a substantial increase in grooming cases, online grooming. Also, we've heard that offenders are discussing in online communities very specifically that this crisis is an opportunity for them to target children. And also some police has said at country level that they're looking at offenders being more active, trying to access child abuse material and downloading it. And also we heard from some hotlines that there is an increase in the number of children calling the cyber tip lines or the child hotlines. We do know that the data on exploitation and abuse of children can only be collected by those who are the front line. And those are the police, the cyber tip lines, also known as hotlines, helplines for children, and tech companies. And evidence gathered in a scientific and more systematic manner is still not available. It's not, and it will need to be collected post COVID-19. This only means that so far, what we know, what we heard, what we've had access to is either anecdotal reports or a partial qualitative and quantitative data being shared at country level by one of the entities I just mentioned. This is of course very useful, but we must be aware that perhaps this is only telling part of the story, not the full story. Furthermore, some of those reports seem to be indicating that the situation might vary from one country to another. So again, future research will tell us what the full picture really is. I'd like now to mention that most patterns of online offending behavior, dynamic of abuse and exploitation with a technology component, have been known for years. This is not new, but I'll mention a few points that I think are relevant for the topic that is bringing us together today. First of all, a digital image of a child being sexually abused that is shared or accessed on the internet is the evidence of offline, hands-on sexual abuse of a child by an offender. The offender can be a tourist, a business person, the mother, or the uncle of the child. Once the evidence of the exploitation or abuse is digitalized in the form of an image or a video, it can be uploaded to the internet and distributed. This shows clearly that there is a continuum of abuse and exploitation between offline and online worlds. We really need to start looking at both environments as if they were disconnected, but rather start looking at them in an integrated manner. This is to be noted regardless of whether there is a crisis or not. Also, often there is an assumption that children are solely approached online and groomed. Perhaps this is because this is the type of cases that is most advertised in the media, at least in some countries. If we take the example of a tourist who goes to a beach and offers money to a young boy to go back with him to his room, then he will walk into the hotel lobby with the boy, pass by the reception unnoticed, go up to the room, pass by the cleaning lady and other guests, enter the room, sexually abuse the child and take a video of the abuse. He will then upload the video and send it on to a friend, say, living in another country. So a critical point of consideration, I think, here is that the internet and technologies are used in multiple ways in the process of exploiting and abusing children, not only to reach out to children online, but offenders can approach their victims offline, then use the technology to document the exploitation, such as in the example I just gave. They first can connect via an online forum also with peers, offenders, discuss where to go, exchange tips. Then the traveling offender can make plans based on the tips, and the recommendations he received from other peers, offenders, travel, sexually exploit the child offline, and then without taking a picture or video. So those are examples to showcase again how technology can be used, different ways technology can be used in the process of exploiting a child. And this is really key to understand if you want to produce strategies that are really fit for purpose. A third consideration is, and something that the police long knows, is that child predators have the ability and the drive to adapt. They adapt their modus operandi when opportunities arise, contexts change, and while technologies evolve. If the laws of a country become stricter, they will move to another country. If the police is more vigilant, they will migrate where the police is less vigilant, and so on. If a search engine blocks searches of child abuse images, they will use another search engine. Finally, we also know that there is something known as displacement. When offenders come to realize that a platform is being monitored or an offender's online community is disrupted, typically what they will do is migrate to another one. And if a traveling offender with a sexual interest in a child cannot travel, he or she is likely to migrate to an online environment to satisfy its sexual urges. This is an issue that clearly emerged in the context of the measures that were taken in Australia when the travel ban for convicted sexual offenders was issued. Without disputing this ban or similar measures that were taken or are being taken, some have pointed out that one of the side effects of this measure would be to push the offenders, or at least some of them, to be more active online, seeking to satisfy their urges. All of these considerations are key to understand, in my views, the challenges we are facing. Number one, in light of the example I just gave, it is clear that the first challenge is that addressing the issue of exploitation of children in the context of travel and tourism should not be approached as a single sector perspective. No one alone has the solution. All sectors have a shared responsibility. It is the responsibility of the travel sector, the hospitality sector, including platforms such as Airbnb, let's not forget that, of the tech company who allow the illegal content to transit through their services, added to community dynamics that tolerate such exploitation by turning a blind eye, and perhaps the local police who also look the other way when they run into the tourist accompanied by the child on his way to the hotel. Each one of Each one of those are parts of a big complex puzzle, and we also need to look at those issues in a comprehensive way, from the legal perspective, the technical perspective, the private sector perspective. In order to have some meaningful impacts, we need to work across sectors to build sustainable and impactful solutions. Another challenge linked to the broader social economic context, and it was mentioned by the previous speaker, is that this crisis is pushing millions into poverty and more poverty, which will contribute to increase the vulnerability of children and their families facing economic hardship, in need of generating some more income, making them an easier prey for offenders. So far I have mentioned offending behaviors affecting children, and I'd like to wrap up mentioning offline responses and recovery mechanisms, usually available for all victims of sexual exploitation and abuse, and how the crisis is disrupting those services. And perhaps this is where disruption has been more noticeable from a victim's perspective. First of all, this crisis has reduced the opportunity for victims to access medical services and psychological services. Also, trusting and caring relationship in victims and children's lives that are key in general are under strain. Also, additionally, there have been reduced opportunities for anyone around children to become more aware of physical and behavioral indicators of the exploitation or abuse due to less contact with the wider circle of trusted adults such as teachers, friends, etc. And finally, law enforcement and hotline capacity have been affected. Some of them at country level, having less analysts being able to detect the volume of cases they're receiving. I'd like to conclude by borrowing the words of UNICEF and say that we need to continue to work those discussions to coordinate efforts across sectors so that the COVID-19 crisis does not become a children's crisis. Thank you very much for your attention, and over to you, Gabriela.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marie-Lo. And these are all very valid points that demonstrate how all forms of sexual exploitation of children are very closely interlinked, and that we need to have responses that are all-encompassing and also adjusted to the evolving nature of these crimes. Also just one very practical example, that grooming should be criminalized in all the countries in this region that haven't done so yet. That's also one of the important elements coming from it. Yeah, so let me turn to you, Roy, now, because we were talking about interlinkages between different forms of sexual exploitation. But this is a concept I would also like to discuss in relation to sustainability, because we often hear about the sustainability mainly in reference to the environmental protection, which of course is a critical issue as well, but at the same time, it's only one of many elements. And GSDC criteria is a very good example of measures for business that encompass various topics related to environment, but also culture and societies. And importantly, for the topic that we are discussing today, they include also prevention of all forms of sexual exploitation of children and discrimination. So I'd like to ask you, could you tell us more about the GSDC criteria itself? And they explain solutions and also practical way that companies and destinations as well can do to protect children. And also in your presentation, could you reflect a little bit on what can be done to ensure that sustainability issues in general, not only child protection, but with this focus in particular, are not deprioritized in this post-COVID recovery phase? Because we see now there is a real struggle for survival of the companies itself. So how to make sure that sustainability still remains an important topic? Over to you, Roy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. So first, just for those that are not familiar, the GSDC stands for the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. And the GSDC manages the GSDC criteria that are the global standards for sustainable travel and tourism. We also act as an international body, providing assurance for sustainable tourism certification in the 3 subsectors of tourism that are hotels, tour operators, and destinations. And in that perspective, the GSTC criteria provides a comprehensive definition of sustainable travel and tourism. So, as Gabriela mentioned, while many lay people associate sustainability only with environmental perspective, the GSTC criteria is holistic in nature and includes the following 4 pillars. A stands for sustainable management, socioeconomical sustainability, cultural sustainability, and only the 4th is environmental sustainability. This means that those that follow the GSTC criteria or other GSTC recognized standards actually address this issue of issues of exploitation and, of course, the importance of protection of children. By the way, the GSTC criteria is available in more than 20 languages on our website, so you can go and check it out if you want. You can put use to it. It's free for all to use. So if we go and look more specifically within the criteria, the GSTC industry criteria that is mainly used by hotels and tour operators, criterion B5 refers to exploitation and harassment, and I will read it here. The organization has implemented policy against commercial, sexual, or any other form of exploitation or harassment, particularly of children, adolescents, women, minorities, and other vulnerable groups. And the same issue is also taking place in the destination criteria that is being used by the destination managers and government organizations that manage tourist destinations. Same, that's criterion B5, which also correlates with SDG 10 and 16 about preventing exploitation and discrimination. Well, this one is a little bit more elaborative. The destination upholds international standards on human rights. It has laws, practices, and establishes code of conduct to prevent any report on human trafficking, modern slavery, and commercial, sexual, or any other form of exploitation, discrimination, and harassment of or against anyone, particularly children, adolescents, women, LGBT, and other minorities. The laws established practices are publicly communicated and enforced. So when we look into what solutions can companies and destinations implement to address child protection during the recovery phase of the COVID-19 situation, again, it's important to use the holistic approach of sustainability. Again, I'll state it again, as Gabriela said, many believe that when we speak about sustainability, we only refer to the environmental part, but it includes more issues such as the social aspect. So following the specific indicators from the GSTC criteria, we have specific guidelines. There is something that hotels, tour operators, and destinations can follow. It's not something that they need to reimagine or recreate. It's already the existing out there. And there are quite a lot that are using it. And we see a lot of good examples and good practices. And I like to read it here. So in the GSTC industry criteria, criterion B5, the indicators are the organization has a document, policy against the exploitation. Action is taken to communicate it. The organization engages with the local community, which is very important. And of course, this is something very clear. It records the employee's age according to the definition, to prevent any child labor according to the definition of ILO. It's in many places, it is easy to find yourself easily employing someone who might lie about his age. So in this case, this is quite important to look into that. The organization, of course, supports actions. It is active against child sex tourism. So those are from the private sector, the industry, meaning the hotels, tour operators, and others. And for the destinations, they have a little bit more to contribute. Their indicators are as follow. Again, reference to specific laws to pertain the destination regarding human rights, exploitation, discrimination, and harassment, evidence of communication and enforcement of these laws, and risk and impact analysis regarding human rights, including human trafficking, modern slavery, and child labor. It actually conducted regularly. Many times one might say, no, nothing is wrong in my own backyard, but actually quite a lot of things are wrong. And it's important to, even if you think that things are right, to actually go and investigate. If the investigation shows that everything is great, fantastic. But if not, then this is a way to know that. And another thing, which is an indicator in the destination GSTC destination criteria, destination and key tourism players are signatories to the Code of Conduct for the Protection of Children from Sexual Exploitation in Travel and Tourism. This refers to what is known as in the travel industry in the short as the code. It is a multi-stakeholder initiative with a mission to provide awareness tools and support to the tourism industry to prevent the sexual exploitation of children. So when companies actually join and engage with the code, they commit to 6 essential steps to keep children safe. And we see that there are a lot of hotels, for example, hotel chains that have a very strong environmental policy that they implement in their hotels. But then we also look into their other sustainability practices, and we see that they are also signatories to the code. And we see that actually have very strict policies in order to combat what we've heard before from Lucia and Marie-Laure about the way that children are being exploited by offenders. For what can be done to ensure sustainability issues in general and child protection in particular are not deprioritized? Well, first is understand that it is part of a holistic view when we speak about sustainability in travel and tourism. And now I actually would like to share just what anyone and all of us are traveling, whether it's leisure or business, we all travel. And this is what we can also do to make change within our own area. So this is where anyone can influence and make a difference. Many make personal changes when they travel sometimes, such as carrying their own bottles and utensils or refrain from eating meat. But each one can actually push their own organization to follow a more sustainability practices when in their supply chain, for example. What do I mean by that? If you work in an organization that sends you to travel either by air or by other means to another place as part of your work, and I would like to comment on that. Remember that travel is not only leisure travel, it is also business travel. And it's actually a huge portion that many times when people speak about tourism tend to forget. They think about nice resorts in a beach or in the mountains, but it actually also includes one of the common hotels within the capital. So you can request your organization to offset your carbons of the flights, and you can also ask them to put you to stay in hotels that are certified as sustainable accommodations, meaning that they adhere to social aspects such as protection of children. And if you're staying at a hotel, just ask them, are you certified? And if not, why? Even if you don't want to go into a lengthy discussion about it, it's just important to state out and loud that we have a certain preference for all of us. Either we are in the travel industry or wherever we are, just influence others by asking that and saying that and reinstate that. And if you take a tour operator, you can do the same. Because we need to remember that many offenders, they take advantage of hotel facilities, as we heard before, to commit these crimes. And this is why the travel and tourism industry is essential to keeping children safe and ensuring the impunity of offenders. And so again, I'd just like to end my part here saying that for those that actually want to do it within the travel industry, those that want to do it, they already do it. Those that want to join and be active in order to combat these and make sure that children are not being exploited, all they need to do is to use the GSTC criteria or other GSTC recognized standards, sign up for the code, and these things are out there. Just use them. They are there for you.
Thank you very much, Roy. Very good points that you brought, and we are very happy that the GSTC criteria explicitly include child protection performance indicator, and definitely a big role and power of individuals to influence sustainable policies by the industry in all of that to prevent sexual exploitation of children. So thank you very much for your contribution and bringing also these practical examples. And with that, I would like to turn to Bertie and exactly to talk more about perspective from a company working in Myanmar, and especially now when it's so difficult for the private sector with so many people around the world that have lost their jobs as the result of the pandemic, and small and medium companies are so heavily impacted. But your company, Sampan Travel, has been undertaking concrete responsible tourism measures already before, and you continue with your commitment for the environment, but also for the communities and for the child protection. Your company is also a member of the Code of Conduct for the protection of children from sexual exploitation in travel and tourism. And you also do not offer visits to school or orphanages as part of your itineraries. That's something that was mentioned already before by Lucia, and that's a very important part of your responsible way your company is operating. So I would like to ask you a threefold question. So could you tell us a little bit more from your practical experience what your company been doing to protect children? What challenges are you facing now and to ensure actually continuity of your own operations? And what do you think also can be done to engage other companies, smaller companies, so they also prioritize child protection? Over to you.
Great, lovely. Thank you, Gabriella, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Bertie. I'm the managing director of Sampan Travel. We run tailor-made tours through Myanmar. Before I start, just to emphasize, these are my experiences running this company. Other tour operators may have a different experience running a company and working towards child protection in Myanmar. But these are my experience, and hopefully they'll be of interest and some use to you listening. So we've been operating for 5 years, and since the start, we've taken child protection quite seriously, and we break it down into five main pillars. So staff is the first one. So training all our team members right from the get-go. That can be done on using online resources such as the codes, and we've done in-person training in Yangon with child safe trainers from Friends International. So that's very important. And the second pillar is these partners, people like the Code and Child Safe, who give us these resources to train our team. We're also a member of Travel Life, which is GSTC accredited, and they give us the platform and the system to record the training we're doing and to make sure that we keep it updated, and to help us initiate that training into the onboarding of new team members. The third pillar would be clients. So as you mentioned, Gabriella, we don't offer visits to schools or orphanages. We never have. That's stated on our website in our sustainability policy. And on arrival, most of our clients are given a booklet of the do's and don'ts for tourists in Myanmar, which goes into a bit more detail about how to be a responsible traveler while visiting Myanmar. It's also important that our sales team are trained in how to respond if an inquiry asks, can they visit an orphanage or a school? It happens very rarely. But when it does, our staff need to be prepared to how to deal with that inquiry. And that comes to our fourth pillar, which is working with social enterprises across the country who we can link up with our clients, so they still can learn more about the situation of Myanmar and of children in need within Myanmar, and learn how to give back and contribute in an appropriate and responsible fashion. And we try and facilitate that so it's done in a gentle and engaging way. So often, as part of our Yangon Day Tour, you might stop off and have you know, a cup of coffee or a cup of tea with one of these organizations, learn about what they're doing, and they can tell you better than we can how best as a traveler you can help the work they're doing. So for example, we work with an organization called Third Story Project, and they create these beautiful books for children in multiple languages that are spoken within Myanmar. And you can go to Third Story Project and you can fund a box of these books we sent up to, you know, a very remote village in northern Myanmar, rather than say going into a village and handing out gifts yourself. And the fifth column of our policy is of supplies, of course. So we have a child protection clause, which we send to all our hotels once a year, which we ask management to sign, just stating their intent to join us in the battle against exploitation of children, but also to encourage them, if they're not already, to be training their staff and to know what to look out for. To come on to the main challenges that we have faced, I think the first one is, of course, it's the general understanding of the issues around child protection. Often when we mention child protection to our partners, their mind may immediately go to child labor, child-on-child sexual activity, or sometimes even they think we're referring to the protection of our clients' children and how child-friendly their hotel is. Now, they're all important things, but often their first reaction is not to consider sexual exploitation of children. So I think, firstly, sharing that knowledge more widely is very important for us as a tour operator to do with our partners. The next big challenge is the fact that a lot of these orphanages in Myanmar are run by monasteries or some of the Christian ed, but a lot of them are run within monasteries themselves. You know, monastic schools which house children which maybe aren't orphans, but are in need due to poverty or internal conflict. Donating to a monastery is such a huge part of the daily fabric of life for any Buddhist in Myanmar. Saying, well, no, you've got to stop donating to that monastery is incredibly difficult. It's something you don't want to really do flippantly. And at the same time, we have to walk quite a fine line between both not appearing to be accusing anyone wantonly of potential abuse, but also making sure people are aware that this can happen anywhere and it can happen everywhere, as Roy was saying, you know, in your own backyard as well. And that's quite a fine line to run. In terms of orphanage tourism, the Myanmar Responsible Tourism Institute and UNICEF, I believe, did a report a couple of years ago into this, and I think their findings were that it wasn't an acute issue within Myanmar, but it did have the potential to grow. I was speaking to a guy just last week, and he was saying, "Oh, Bertie, but you know, it's a win-win situation. The orphanage gets a donation, the children get to meet some foreigners, practice their English, and the client is happy as well." So I think there are still a lot of, you know, regional guides who still aren't aware of the possible risks inherent within foreigners visiting orphanages or schools. Finally, another challenge I believe is that it's often regarded as a foreign problem. By that I mean maybe something that's perpetrated just by foreigners or that happens in foreign countries. I think that's changing now quite rapidly in Myanmar because, well, there was a very well-publicized case in Naypyidaw last year when a toddler was raped, and that really shone a spotlight on this problem within Myanmar. And I believe in the last few years, the number of reported cases of child abuse has risen quite rapidly, which I believe reflects a growing awareness of the problem and the need to address this. In terms of how we're dealing now in the time of the pandemic, I think sustainable tourism is known about quite widely within the Myanmar tourism industry, but often it's approached as a tick box exercise. And I think in times of crisis, when your revenue isn't coming in, I think a lot of small tour operators and small hotels may well see it as a sort of a luxury they don't have the time for anymore, or simply not the funds to put towards training their staff or the time to put towards creating policies, which is understandable on one hand, but I think also it comes down to the way we approach sustainability in general within the Myanmar tourism industry. I think it's important that we regard it not as a bolt-on to your organization, but something that you build into the very fabric of what your company is. And like other panelists were saying, it requires interaction between industries. So whether or not there's foreign tourists traveling through Myanmar, as responsible members of our communities, both as individuals and as corporations, this is something that we need to tackle. And it shouldn't be reliant upon the number of foreign tourists who are coming in. It's something that as a member of society that we need to be addressing. And I think that message is getting home, but it always needs to be emphasized for sure. That's all, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bertie, for your input. And I would really like to thank you, because it's incredibly valuable to hear your groundwork and this practical experience and a continuing strong commitment. And as you're saying, it needs to be there always, and not only specifically now in this situation. And I think what you shared with us is very inspiring for other companies and their partners also in the supply chains to embed child protection in their business models, and not, as you said, just like a tick box. And just to add to what you share, it's not only the role of companies, it's also the role of the governments, and definitely more should be done in this region, also by the governments, to develop national child protection standards that sometimes could be also obligatory for the tourism and travel industry. Talking about the governments, I would like to turn to Dr. Rinchen, so you can share with us your broad regional perspective. And in the light of the current situation, and also all the challenges that other speakers presented before you, could you tell us a little bit about what actions are being taken by SAIVAC, and what actions still need to be taken by the government, so this enabling environment for business can be created, so they can effectively respect children's rights. Over to you, Dr. Rinchen.
Thank you, Gabriela. And I want to say how happy I am to be part of this panel. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. For all those who are listening in who are not familiar with SAIVAC, SAIVAC is the South Asia Initiative to End Violence Against Children. It's a unique intergovernmental platform with the civil society, children, and UNINGO's network in the governing board of SAIVAC. So we are truly a wide platform. And SAIVAC was established in response to the global study on violence against children, and very close to ECPAT's interest, in the sense that the Global Congress on Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children and the processes had a major impact on the conceptualization of SAIVAC in the beginning, and continues to be an important partner in terms of the work we do. SAIVAC actually is a SAARC apex body for children, and we work with the 8 governments of 8 countries of SAARC, which is Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. And we actually deal with 5 thematic areas: the most commonest forms of violence against children in South Asia, which is child marriage, trafficking, child labor, sexual abuse and exploitation, corporal punishment. And we have gender, disability, and child participation as cross-cutting themes. And the fundamental basis on which, or the premise on which this whole process or understanding is built, is on the basis that poverty is the bedrock of vulnerabilities and violation of rights of children, as well as the fuel that triggers violence against children in South Asia and elsewhere as well. And also the fact that we have very fragile child protection systems, and child protection and violence against children, or for that matter, child rights, do not really feature as very high priority in the overall business of state institutions or governments of South Asia, and I'm sure for that matter, other regions of the world. Now, before COVID crisis came in, we were already dealing with a crisis. We have issues related to violence against children that has been always receiving very low priority, and we have been continuously trying to move this forward by lobbying and by trying to build a joint regional effort to lobby with member states to be able to focus on child rights. And fortunately, all 8 governments continue to rally around this regional effort. And we have been able to put our efforts together to move the agenda forward. SIWOC has been, over the years, working very closely with all the 8 governments to prioritize violence against children. And we have been able to develop regional action plans and regional efforts, including national level efforts to work towards ending violence against children. And child sexual abuse exploitation, including online safety, is one of those priority areas of action. Now, the COVID setting and the pandemic has further deepened or exacerbated the whole scenario related to violence against children. And with, as many of the previous panelists said, I don't want to repeat them, but we have now created a crisis within a crisis. And therefore, it is so critical that when we ease out of the COVID lockdowns, and as we initiate the travel and tourism industry, we need to ensure that rights of children and violence against children, and particularly, using children as an incentive or as a source of cheap labor or as a source of economy for the family, should not be allowed to happen. While I will touch on this as I move into the regional framework, it is important to underline that the South Asia region has actually been working on a regional action plan to end child sexual abuse exploitation, including online safety. And this decision was taken by the 4th SIWOC ministerial meeting in India in 2016. And the efforts have been, triggered forward by support of all the 8 countries. Except for Afghanistan, we have had in the last 3 years, consultations and meetings in all the countries. And finally, the regional action plan to end child sexual abuse and exploitation was adopted in the 8th SIWOC Governing Board meeting, which was held in November in Maldives in 2019. Now, while this is a joint collective effort of all the 8 governments and civil society organizations, children, UN NGO partners working on violence against children and child rights, we have also roped in the travel and tourism industry, the chambers of commerce and industry. We have also brought in hotel association representatives, trekkers association representatives, when we are addressing the issue of one of the 6 major strategies of the regional action plan, which is working on corporate sector and the industry. And we have 2 major strategic objectives in terms of ensuring the rights of children or protection of children in the travel and tourism industry. And which is one is to strengthen the role and responsibility of the private sector in child sexual abuse and exploitation, and thereby hold them accountable, and to expand and strengthen the actions of the private sector to address child sexual abuse and exploitation and take effective measures for implementation. So to meet these two major objectives, we have outlined a number of action areas, which includes from ensuring that there is a proper knowledge of information by undertaking research in terms of what the current scenario is like, and then see how we can build in or promote or develop child protection frameworks, as previous speaker said, for the travel and tourism industry, to ensure that there are clearly defined child protection checklists or policies which the industry actually adheres to and follows through. And then to hold continuous meetings and dialogues with the travel and tourism industry, with the WAC community, and to ensure that there is an ongoing dialogue in terms of also building capacity, in terms of ensuring that there is a proper understanding in terms of how child protection needs to be grounded in terms of the industry, and without compromising on the industry's missions and objectives, as well as the need to ensure that there are adequate frameworks in place. Now, one of the areas that, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, it's a connection was not so good for a second, but it's all good.
Okay. So one of the areas
we can hear you.
The one of the areas which the regional action plan also ensures as an important activity is the code to be now promoted by also the WAC community, and that both the government side as well as the industry and the service providers on the ground actually understand what the code actually promotes, and therefore that is used as a basis on which to hold both sides accountable in terms of ensuring that children are protected. Hello, is this better?
Yes, I think there's some problem with the connection, but now it's it's okay. We also have we're closely coming to the time to questions, so if you could
so I'm almost done. So
what
I think it is important to understand is that this regional action plan is endorsed by the intergovernmental process. And unfortunately, the COVID pandemic came and we had to postpone the 5th SIWAC ministerial meeting, which will have then actually considered this in April. But we are hoping that sometime towards this year, before the year ends, the COVID pandemic will ease out, and we will have an opportunity to make this a political instrument that can hold everybody accountable. So that is one opportunity. And I would like to, while I'm sure there will be questions coming in, I would like to end by saying that, with this experience of the COVID and all these issues that keeps cropping up in my e-consultations with my networks in the region, the focus now, I think, invariably is to ensure that governments invest in supporting vulnerable communities, families, and to ensure that there is a livelihood option and children do not become an economic alternative, and that children actually are treated as children and not as economic items to be bartered. And one important element which one of my colleagues yesterday mentioned, he said that as the COVID epidemic eases out and as the countries ease lockdowns and economic opportunities are being created, the responsibility of turning the wheel of the economy should not be placed on children. Children must be ensured. We must ensure that children are protected. We must ensure that children do not become the barter for easing out of financial and vulnerability crisis. And the tourism industry must ensure that they hold accountability in terms of whatever tools and guidelines they may have. But governments, as we let the tourism open up, ensure that these guidelines are enforced and monitored, and that we have clearly defined community and grassroots mechanisms that actually also lobby to ensure that children do not become more vulnerable than they are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rinchan. Thank you for your contribution. It was a very comprehensive picture of what governments can do to protect children, and also this leadership from the governments. It's very important so the responsible business can continue, and long-term policy responses are needed, including the dialogue of the governments, both with businesses and with NGOs. And importantly, thank you so much for your continuous leadership on this topic in the region. Thank you very much. I'd like now to open floor to questions and answers from the participants. And in the meanwhile, Damian has already shared some with me. I'm not sure if we will have time to address all of them, but let me start with the first question to Bertie from Sampan Travel. So our participants is writing, many thanks for your continuous commitment to child protection and in these difficult times for travel and tourism business around the world. So what is your opinion? What businesses like yours want and need from NGOs, from civil society organizations that focus on this topic during the recovery phase? How they can help you?
Thank you, Gabriela.
Over to you, Bert.
Thank you. Yes, I think, to be honest, it's the same thing that we would require pre-COVID and going on into the future as well. Training is key, and training trainers is even more useful for us. It's all very well me and my team knowing about these situations and about what we need to do, but sometimes communicating that to our partners and suppliers is a challenge. Certainly for me, not being Burmese, there are so many sort of cultural sensitivities which I can be blind to. So I think having, for us here in Yangon, having local Burmese trainers who can spread the word and share their expertise with guides throughout the country, small ground handlers, hotels, would be vital, I think, in getting the industry as a whole to raise its game. Sampan doesn't have the capacity to do that, so if NGOs and other groups do, then that would be incredibly appreciated. I know it's already going on in part, but more would be better.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure there are many NGOs also listening to us, and also ECPAT Network is there to help and support. Okay, let me turn to another question that can be addressed to Marilo and Lucia. Psychological counseling to victims and their families. If in case NGO or help from others are not within reach, how can one give intervention to these cases?
Who starts?
Who would like to start?
Okay. I mean, what I'll advise first, and I'm not a psychologist, but what I've learned from my colleagues who are psychologists is that providing interventions, if you're not prepared, can be more damaging than not intervening. So I'd say that you have to be very cautious and make sure you are prepared appropriately and consider getting advice from counselors. And I can share with you a link of resources from the e-Safety Commission, Australian one, where there are plenty of resources mentioned, references to resources online where you can reach out to counseling services of all sorts, and they have chat services, and they have websites where you can perhaps discuss those issues before you self-engaging in intervening. And also the Child Helpline International. If you go to their webpage, you would have a local helpline that perhaps can guide you in that regard. That would be my advice. Over to you, Lucia.
Thank you, Marie-Laure. Actually, I can also give the example of Cambodia once again, because of course, clearly with the COVID-19 pandemic, one important concern has been the increased need of mental health and psychosocial support for children, but also for parents and caregivers, for everyone, because with this particular situation, everybody could have developed some anxiety and some insecurity and stress that had to be important to address in a very accessible way. So actually what we supported and promoted here in Cambodia was that in addition to the existing already child helplines, there was an additional specialized service, as Marie-Laure was saying, that meant providing mental and health and psychosocial support shouldn't be invented, but should be provided by specialists. And therefore, there was an activation here in Cambodia of a specialized new hotline providing mental health and psychosocial support by TPO, a well-known NGO globally on mental health and psychosocial support. So this was providing not only very easily access through a number, a telephone number, but they also provided a guidance through the production of a number of videos that were shared on social media. And in addition, what we have also supported as UNICEF as part of that same hotline to create also a specialized hotline for social service workforce. Because another aspect that is extremely important to know in this particular context of COVID-19 is that also the people who are providing support to children and parents and caregivers and other vulnerable people require some support for their own well-being and how to manage the stressful situation. So this is an example from Cambodia that I am sure also in many other countries that there has been similar hotlines and services provided, considering the disruption of services and the limitation of accessing the clients and beneficiaries directly.
Thank you very much. Let me address another question, and I think a few people could answer this. It relates to orphanage, so-called business. So how should governments capitalize on the lack of volunteers and tourists visiting orphanages presently to ensure that the orphanage business does not reopen in the recovery phase of the industry? Who would like to take this question on? Maybe Dr. Rinshen?
Yes, maybe I could try. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I seem to be having a little problem with the net.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I can try. Yeah, now, one of the major concerns related to, institutional care of children and this whole debate about alternate care with the COVID pandemic, and again, further compounded by one disaster after another. And then this whole issue of migrant workforce driving in full force back to their homes. And also the issue of a lot of children without parental or, any other alternate care other than institutional. While a lot of orphanages, a lot of shelter homes have emptied out with this whole nightmare of COVID, but they will again be, for states, the challenge of how do we provide support to children without any care. So I think the issue is going to be very dicey and complicated, but I think it's important that no matter what type of care is provided, governments and all those institutions who are providing support for children and institutions providing support for civil society and service providers ensure that there are clearly defined guidelines, SOPs, and ensuring effective monitoring of these institutions and a process of deinstitutionalization actually in place. By saying that we should not allow children to go back to the institutions in a situation as we are now, is going to leave a lot of children without care or will be subjected to trafficking, all types of abuses. So I think it is not as simple as we would like it to be. But definitely, I think the need of the hour is for grassroots institutions, community support systems, and ensuring that there is adequate support, financial and livelihood support extended to vulnerable families, and to ensure that communities actually strengthen, we are able to strengthen the traditional community support systems, family systems, so that children do not have to be displaced or placed in institutions and orphanages. But definitely this is something that needs to be dealt with very, very sensitively and very carefully. I'm not sure whether I made any sense, but this seems to be the reality now.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Richard. And Lucia or Bertie or other speakers, would you like to add to that?
I would only add, obviously collecting data is, from the outset is vital. The report that was conducted in a couple of years ago in Myanmar, one of the biggest takeaways from that was just how little data was collected by the orphanages themselves about who was coming in and where they're from, were they an expat, were they a tourist, which country they're from, all that stuff was very unclear. And so it was hard to get an impression of actually what the state of orphanage tourism is, let alone where you want it to get to in the future. So I think if the data isn't already there, making sure you know who is visiting orphanages and where is vital to start.
Maybe what I can add to this subject.
Thank you, Bertie. Lucia, would you like to add to that?
Yes, definitely. Actually, I mean, again, from the experience here in Cambodia, but I know it's very similar also in many other countries. There is clearly on one side, of course, there is a strong movement and care reform process to ensure, that children are not institutionalized without, any and unnecessarily. But at the same time, there are a lot of efforts to create viable alternatives. So again, as I was saying at the very beginning, in each and every country, what is important now is to create those services and those opportunities more accessible, and strengthening, of course, the social service workforce response to a very quick identification of those children that could be at risk of family separation in this specific context, and because of COVID-19 or because of a combination of factors, and ensure that again there will be a very much coordinated response that will always look into alternatives to institutionalization. And this is very possible. I mean, I've seen this in Cambodia. If the actors are engaged in this process, is very much possible. We have very good examples from here. Of course, there are cases where children are still falling through the system, you know, and not always, because of course the capacity and resources are not everywhere at the same level. However, it's very important to keep investing in those efforts. And if I may, Gabriela, I also saw a question that was actually asking, you know, what would be the alternatives to institutionalization? That's where I was, and for a tourist that travels to a specific country, instead of course, visiting an orphanage, what can they do? Well, it's very simple. They can just, I mean, again, Cambodia, for as an example, as soon as a tourist comes here, it's very often, there are a wide dissemination of tips for travels, and that have been developed by several NGOs and partners in collaboration with the government to really direct tourists for appropriate information and direct tourists to key actors that can, first of all, provide information, accurate information about the situation, what to do and what not to do to protect children. And then also how, if they want to help, of course, the help is very much needed, but to channel that help towards specific organizations that promote family support, that support families to address and to be able to care for their children, rather than pushing on the other side the institutionalization of children when it's not necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Lucia. And Roy, a question for you about sustainability criteria. Will new risk assessments for destination be encouraged as tourism begins to grow again? Over to you, Roy.
I'm not quite sure I got it. Could you repeat the last part?
Talking about sustainability criteria, will new risk assessments for destinations be encouraged as tourism begins to grow again?
Well, definitely. The whole COVID crisis actually created a situation where not necessarily positive, but it does allow a lot of destinations to observe. And in that sense, it is actually quite possible, and we actually see it at the GSTC, that although some destinations are not communicating it, but they are actually continuing to work on a lot of policies related to sustainability. But because most of the tourists at the moment are more focused on health and safety rather than social issues, well, now of course there are some social issues coming with what's happening with the United States, but the focus is mostly on health and safety. However, we do see destinations that continue to work towards sustainability, and the reason that destinations are able to do it is because unlike the private sector that has been affected very strongly because there is no cash flow, and only those operators and hotels that have cash reserves are able to survive, while small entities might not survive it. The governments, well, they already have the budget, so they continue to work on it, but they keep it quiet. So I can give an example of Japan that has recently, as formally and out loudly said that they have adopted the GSTC criteria for destinations, and they are disseminating it within smaller destinations and smaller municipalities. But again, the communication focus is now on health and safety, while destinations are actually looking into that. Saying that, still destinations should be accountable for it, and it is important that anyone, whether you are a professional or you're just someone who travels to the destination, have something that can make a difference in that sense. So yes, to make it short, destinations, it did allow destinations,
because we are close to the end of the session. Yeah, thank you everybody for your very important contributions and to this valuable discussion about the topic of sustainability. And we are coming almost to the end of the session. We weren't able to answer and address all the questions, but I think this can be done with participants approaching directly all the speakers, and I'm sure your contacts can be easily found on the websites of your organizations. So we encourage everybody to contact the speakers directly for any further questions that you may have. And just to conclude, I wanted to say that we set up this session to discuss challenges, but also it was meant to action to prioritize child protection as part of sustainable and responsible tourism. And we hope that this discussion will continue. And I'd like to thank all the speakers and panelists for your partnership, for work together on this important topic. And with this, I would like to bring this session to close. And on behalf of ECPAT International, I would like to thank UNDP and all the co-organizers of this forum, including UNICEF, for having hosted our session. And again, a big thanks to all the panelists and to all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.